David liked peaceful mornings. He usually woke up early, made himself a cup of tea, and sat on the small porch of his home. His house was not the biggest in the neighborhood, but it was neat, well kept, and had a strong wooden fence around the yard. That fence was special to David because he had built it himself with the help of his father years ago. It was not only strong but also gave him a sense of privacy and comfort. The neighborhood was managed by an HOA, which meant there were rules for almost everything. David followed those rules carefully. His grass was trimmed, his trash bins were pulled in on time, and the paint on his home was approved by the committee. He believed in keeping peace because peace meant fewer arguments. Unfortunately, peace was not something his neighbor Karen liked. Karen lived in the house right next to David. She was the kind of person who always found faults in others. If David's car was parked an inch too close to the sidewalk, she would leave a note. If he painted his door a shade darker than she liked, she would complain. Everyone in the street knew that Karen enjoyed controlling things. The HOA board listened to her too often, so neighbors tried to avoid her whenever possible. On this particular day, the sun was bright, and David was outside fixing a porch light. He had tools spread out and was carefully replacing the bulb when a loud sound shook the air. It was not the sound of construction or hammering. It was a crash. The sound was sharp, sudden, and heavy. David's heart jumped. He rushed down the porch steps and ran toward the noise. When he reached the front yard, he froze in shock. A car had slammed straight into his fence. The boards had cracked, a few had fallen, and the car's bumper was stuck between the broken wood. The driver was Ryan, Karen's teenage son. He sat behind the wheel with wide eyes and trembling hands. The car engine was still running, and the smell of burned rubber filled the air. It looked like he had tried to turn too quickly and lost control, swerving straight into the fence. David stood in silence for a moment, trying to process what he was seeing. The fence was badly damaged and the car looked dented. Just then, Karen came running from her driveway. Her face was red, not from worry about her son but from anger. "This is your fault, David," she shouted as she reached the scene. "Your fence is too close to the street." Ryan could not avoid it. David blinked. "What are you talking about?" "My fence has been in the same place for years. It was approved by the HOA when I built it." Karen crossed her arms, glaring. "It does not matter. If your fence had been placed correctly, Ryan would not have hit it. You need to pay for the damages to his car." David felt frustration rising inside him, but he forced himself to remain calm. He turned to Ryan, who looked ashamed but said nothing. The boy avoided eye contact and kept his hands on the steering wheel as if hoping to disappear. "Ryan," David said gently, "are you all right? Did you get hurt?" Ryan shook his head quickly. "No, I'm fine." "Good," David replied. That's what matters most right now. But Karen did not care about kindness. She stepped forward and pointed at the broken fence. "This is dangerous. A fence like this should not even be here. I will make sure the HOA knows about this and you will pay for everything." David knew arguing with her would only make things worse. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called the police. He explained that there had been a crash and gave them his address. When the officers arrived, they carefully examined the scene. They asked questions, checked the car, and measured the position of the fence. One officer walked up to David. "Sir, how long has this fence been standing here?" the officer asked. "For more than 10 years, David replied. "It was built with HOA approval, and it has never caused any issue. You can check the neighborhood records if needed." The officer nodded. "It looks perfectly fine to me. The fence is in your property line, not on the road. It's not the fence that caused this." Before David could speak again, Karen stepped in loudly. "That's not true. His fence is too close. Ryan tried to avoid a squirrel on the road and he had no choice but to turn. The fence should not be allowed to stay here. He should pay for Ryan's car repairs." The officer looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, the fence is legal and safe. Your son lost control of the car. This is clearly an accident caused by the driver, not by the fence." Karen's face turned redder. She waved her hands. No, you don't understand. My son is a careful driver. This is David's fault." But the officer had already turned to Ryan. "Son, were you speeding or distracted?" Ryan's shoulders dropped. He looked down and said quietly, "I was trying to answer a text." "I didn't see the turn in time," Karen gasped. "Ryan, no. Don't say that." She tried to cover his words, but the officer had already noted them down. David remained silent, though inside he felt both relief and sadness. Relief because the truth had come out. Sadness because Ryan, who was just a teenager, had made a careless mistake that could have been much worse if someone had been standing nearby. The officers explained that the car would need to be towed. Since Ryan had admitted fault, the responsibility for damages would fall on him, not David. Karen argued, shouted, and even threatened to take the matter to the HOA board. But the officers were firm. As the tow truck arrived and began pulling Ryan's car out of the broken fence, Karen stood on the sidewalk, fuming. She pointed at David again. "This isn't over. You'll hear from the HOA. You'll regret this." David stayed calm. He folded his arms and simply said, "I'll let the HOA see the truth. I have nothing to hide." The tow truck drove away with the damaged car, and Ryan walked slowly back to his house, his head hanging low. David looked at the broken fence and sighed. It would take days to repair, but at least no one was hurt. That night, David sat on his porch again. The broken fence was still there, a reminder of the crash. He knew Karen would not stop. She would try to twist the story to make him look guilty. But David also knew he had the truth on his side and the police report to prove it. He sipped his tea slowly, staring at the stars above. The neighborhood was quiet again, but deep inside, David sensed that this incident was only the beginning of a bigger fight. Karen was not the kind of person who let things go, and he was right. The next morning, a letter from the HOA appeared in his mailbox. The morning after the crash, David walked outside to collect his mail. The air was fresh and the sun was slowly climbing over the rooftops. Birds chirped in the distance, but his peace was quickly broken when he saw a white envelope with the HOA logo on it. His heart sank. He knew exactly what this was. He tore it open and read. The letter was short but sharp. It said there had been a complaint about his fence, and that the HOA expected him to attend a hearing later that week. The words made David shake his head. Karen had wasted no time. Instead of accepting responsibility for her son's mistake, she had already turned to the HOA to blame him. David sat on his porch with the letter in his hand. He could almost hear Karen's voice in his head, loud and demanding, insisting he was the problem. He knew she would not let this go easily. Later that day, as David was hammering temporary boards on the fence to keep his yard closed, Karen walked over. She wore dark glasses and held her phone in her hand as if ready to record. "You'll be paying for this, David," she said. "The HOA has already been informed. They understand this fence is a danger. You'll be told to take it down, and you'll have to cover Ryan's car repairs too. That's only fair." David set his hammer down and looked at her calmly. "Karen, the police already made their report. The fence is not the problem. Your son admitted he was texting while driving. That is the truth." Karen waved her hand. "The police don't decide what is safe for this neighborhood. The HOA does, and they listen to me. So get ready." She turned and walked back to her driveway, her heels clicking on the concrete. David sighed. He knew the upcoming hearing would not be pleasant, but he also knew the facts were on his side. He decided he would gather all the proof he needed. That evening, David pulled out old documents from his desk. He found the original approval letter from the HOA years ago, showing the fence had been built exactly where it was allowed. He also found photos from when the fence was built, showing board members standing with him. These papers, he thought, would be his shield against Karen's accusations. As the days passed, the broken fence continued to remind everyone in the neighborhood of the crash. Some neighbors came by to ask what had happened. Most of them already knew about Karen's behavior and shook their heads when David explained the situation. "She always finds someone to blame," said Mrs. Green, who lived across the street. "Don't worry, David, everyone saw what happened." Ryan was speeding and distracted. "You shouldn't be punished for that." "Thank you," David said with a tired smile. "I just hope the HOA listens to reason." On the day of the hearing, David dressed neatly and carried a folder of documents with him. The meeting was held in the small clubhouse at the entrance of the neighborhood. Several HOA board members sat at a long table, papers spread out before them. Karen was already there, sitting straight in her chair with her arms crossed. Ryan sat beside her, quiet and nervous. The chairperson, Mr. Howard, called the meeting to order. "We are here to discuss a complaint regarding Mr. David's fence. A resident has raised concerns that the fence may be unsafe and improperly placed." Karen leaned forward quickly. "That's right. The fence is too close to the road. My son had an accident because of it. The fence needs to be removed and David should take responsibility for the damages caused." The board members looked at David, waiting for his response. David stood, opened his folder, and spoke calmly. My fence has stood for over 10 years without a single problem. It was approved by this very board when it was built. Here is the approval letter. He handed the paper to Mr. Howard. And here are photographs from the day it was finished, showing the fence in the exact same spot. Mr. Howard examined the documents carefully, then passed them to the other members. They whispered among themselves. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat but quickly spoke again. Even if it was approved years ago, that doesn't mean it's safe today. It blocks visibility and puts drivers at risk. David shook his head. The police who came to the scene already confirmed the fence is legal and safe. The accident happened because Ryan admitted he was texting while driving. That is the truth, and it is written in the police report. I also have a copy of that report. He handed another paper to the board. Karen's face turned pale as she realized the evidence was stacking against her. Ryan kept his eyes down, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. The board studied the report for several minutes. Finally, Mr. Howard looked up. It is clear from these documents that the fence is approved, legal and not the cause of the accident. We cannot hold David responsible for this matter. Karen's eyes widened. You can't be serious. You're just going to let him get away with this? Mr. Howard replied firmly. This was not his fault. The responsibility lies with the driver. The HOA will not be taking action against David. The room was silent for a moment. Then Karen stood, her voice rising. This isn't fair. He always gets away with things. You'll regret this. I'll find another way. She stormed out of the clubhouse, dragging Ryan with her. The door slammed shut behind them. David remained standing, though relief washed over him. He thanked the board for their time and gathered his papers. Some neighbors who had attended the hearing patted him on the shoulder and offered kind words. On his way home, David saw Karen standing on her porch, her arms crossed and her face set in a scowl. He knew she would not forgive easily. She would likely find another reason to bother him. But for now, the truth had been spoken clearly. That evening, David sat once again on his porch with a warm cup of tea. The broken fence was still there, waiting to be repaired, but his heart was lighter. He thought about how important it was to stay calm and let facts speak louder than anger. Still, he could not shake the feeling that this fight with Karen was not over. People like her did not back down. They searched for new battles. David only hoped that when the next one came, he would be ready. And he would have to be ready sooner than he thought, because the very next day, a new problem appeared right on his front lawn. The morning after the HOA meeting, David woke up feeling hopeful. He thought the worst part was behind him. He had shown the truth. The board had supported him, and for once, Karen had not gotten her way. He believed he might finally get some peace. But when he stepped outside, his hope faded. Right on his front lawn sat a bright orange sign. It was hammered into the ground and read, "Unsafe property. Needs immediate review." David's eyes narrowed. The sign did not look official. It had no city logo, no HOA stamp, just big black letters painted across a wooden board. He bent down and touched it. The wood was new, the paint still fresh. Someone had clearly made it by hand. He didn't need to guess who had done it. Sure enough, as David stood staring, he heard Karen's voice from across the street. She was watering her flowers, but her eyes never left him. "I warned you, David," she called out. "You may have fooled the board, but the whole neighborhood can see the truth now. That fence is a hazard." David straightened up and pulled the sign out of the ground. "This doesn't belong here," he said firmly. "If you have a real complaint, take it to the board again." "Don't play games," Karen smirked. "Maybe I didn't put it there. Maybe the neighbors are worried too. You can't stop people from speaking their minds." David shook his head. He knew it was her. But he also knew arguing in the yard would only give her more satisfaction. He carried the sign to his garage and locked it inside. He decided not to waste his energy. Later that day, while David was at work, more trouble came. When he returned in the evening, he found a pile of garbage bags dumped right beside his damaged fence. Old food containers, wrappers, even broken shoes were scattered across the grass. Someone had clearly dragged their trash from another house and left it on his property. David sighed deeply. This was no accident. It was another attempt to make him look like a bad neighbor. As he began cleaning up, Mrs. Green from across the street walked over. "David, I saw Ryan earlier today," she said softly. "He was carrying those bags. I think Karen told him to leave them here. I'm sorry you have to deal with this." "Thank you for telling me," David replied. "I'll handle it." He collected the garbage into new bags and placed them neatly on the curb for pickup. He knew reporting this would only create more arguments, but at least he had a witness now. Mrs. Green had seen it herself. The following day, David decided to repair the fence properly. He measured the damaged area, bought new wooden boards, and spent hours hammering, sawing, and fixing. The sound of tools echoed across the street. Some neighbors waved to him in support. Others simply watched quietly, knowing drama always followed when Karen was involved. By the afternoon, the fence looked strong again. Fresh wood stood in place of the broken boards. David stepped back to admire his work, wiping sweat from his forehead. For a brief moment, he felt proud. But Karen did not let the moment last. She walked over with her phone camera pointed at him. "Working hard to cover up your mistake?" she said. David stayed calm. "I'm repairing my property. That's what responsible people do." Karen filmed the fence from different angles. "Don't worry. I'll be sending these videos to the HOA. Everyone should see how unsafe this fence still looks." David ignored her and kept working, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. Eventually, she left, muttering under her breath. That evening, when David sat on his porch with his usual cup of tea, Ryan came walking over. The teenager looked nervous, glancing back toward his house as if making sure his mother wasn't watching. "Mr. David," Ryan said quietly, "I'm sorry about everything. I didn't mean to hit your fence. And I didn't mean for all this trouble to happen." David looked at him with gentle eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Ryan. I know accidents happen. What matters is that you're safe." Ryan nodded. "My mom, she doesn't like to admit when she's wrong. She wants me to listen to her, but I feel bad. I don't think it's fair what she's doing to you." David placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It takes courage to say that. Don't worry. Just focus on being careful in the future. I'll take care of the rest." Ryan gave a small smile before hurrying back home. David watched him go, feeling a mixture of sadness and understanding. It was not easy being Karen's son. Days turned into a week. For a short while, things grew quiet. David thought maybe Karen had given up. But one evening, just as the sun was setting, he heard loud voices outside. When he stepped onto his porch, he saw Karen standing with two other neighbors. She was pointing at his fence, waving her arms and speaking in her usual loud tone. "This fence is an eyesore," she declared. "It lowers the value of our homes. It's not fair that we have to look at it every day." One of the neighbors, Mr. Lee, looked uncertain. "Karen, the fence looks fine." David fixed it. "I don't see a problem." But Karen pushed on. "You don't understand. It's about the principle. If we allow one person to ignore safety, others will too. We need to act before someone gets hurt." David walked down his steps and joined them. "The fence is safe and approved. You all know it. This is not about safety. This is about Karen trying to win an argument." Mr. Lee nodded slowly. "I agree with David. Let's not make this bigger than it already is." Karen glared at both men. "You'll regret siding with him. You'll see." The neighbors dispersed, leaving Karen fuming. David knew she was losing support, but that only made her more dangerous. She hated losing. And every time someone disagreed with her, she fought harder. That night, as David locked his doors, he noticed something strange. A shadow moved near his fence. He stepped closer to the window and saw Ryan standing there with a paintbrush. The boy was painting over the fresh boards, covering them with dark streaks of ugly spray paint. David rushed outside. "Ryan, stop!" he shouted. Ryan froze, the can of paint slipping from his hand. His face turned pale. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "She made me do it." Before David could answer, Karen appeared, running across the yard. "Ryan, what are you doing?" "Don't just stand there," she yelled. But her eyes betrayed her. She had sent him. David looked at her firmly. "This has gone too far. You've damaged my property now. I will not stay silent." Karen's smile was cold. "Prove it. It's just your word against mine." But Ryan stood there trembling. "Mom, please." "Stop, he's right. You told me to do it." The yard grew silent. Karen's face twisted with anger, but she had no words left. Neighbors peeked from their windows, having heard the noise. They had seen enough to understand what was happening. David knew this was the turning point. The police had already ruled in his favor once. Now, with Ryan admitting the truth, Karen's games were crumbling. But still, David also knew she would not give up without one last fight. And that fight was closer than he expected. Because the very next morning, a letter appeared in his mailbox again. this time not from the HOA but from the city inspector. The morning air was cool when David walked to his mailbox. He expected the usual stack of bills and flyers, but instead, there was a single white envelope with the city's official seal. His stomach tightened. Slowly, he tore it open. The letter was from the city inspector's office. It said his property had been reported for safety concerns and that an inspection would take place within the week. If violations were found, he could face fines or be forced to make changes. David closed his eyes for a moment. He knew who had sent this complaint. Karen had failed with the police and the HOA, so now she had gone to the city. She would not stop until she won something against him. Later that morning, as David was sweeping his porch, Karen strolled by with a wide smile. She wore a sun hat and carried her phone in one hand. "Lovely day, isn't it?" she said sweetly, though her eyes glittered with triumph. David looked at her calmly. "The city inspector is coming because of you, isn't he?" Karen laughed lightly. "I don't know what you mean, but I do know that unsafe structures should be looked at by professionals. I'm only thinking about the neighborhood." David didn't reply. He had learned that silence often frustrated her more than words. When the day of the inspection arrived, a silver city truck pulled up in front of David's house. A man in a neat uniform stepped out, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as Mr. Collins, the inspector assigned to review the property. Karen was already outside, standing with her arms folded. "I'll show you exactly where the problem is," she said quickly, pointing at the fence. But Mr. Collins raised a hand. "Ma'am, I'll need to speak with the property owner first." David greeted him politely and explained the situation. He showed the inspector the fence, the repair work, and the original HOA approval letter. He even provided a copy of the police report from the crash. Mr. Collins inspected carefully. He walked along the fence, measured the distance from the road, and checked the structure's stability. He tapped the boards, looked at the posts, and scribbled notes on his clipboard. Karen hovered nearby, muttering complaints. "It's too close. It blocks the view. It's dangerous." Finally, Mr. Collins turned to both of them. "The fence is fully legal. It's placed within the property line and follows all city codes. In fact, it's in excellent condition for its age. There is no violation here." David felt relief wash over him, but Karen's face turned red. "You can't be serious. Look at it. It's ugly and unsafe." "You must see that." Mr. Collins shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, personal opinions about appearance are not violations. This fence meets every standard. There will be no fines or orders for removal." Karen opened her mouth again, but Mr. Collins gave her a sharp look. "If there are no further questions, my job here is done." He shook David's hand and returned to his truck. Karen stood frozen for a moment, then spun on her heel and marched back to her house without a word. David watched her go. He wanted to believe this would finally end things, but deep inside he knew better. Karen had been embarrassed again. People like her did not forget or forgive. That evening, neighbors came by to talk. Mrs. Green smiled warmly. "We saw the inspector leave." "Good for you, David. It's about time someone stood up to her nonsense." Mr. Lee added, "She's making herself look bad. Everyone knows now she's the one causing trouble, not you." Their support made David feel stronger. He thanked them, but he stayed cautious. For several days after the inspection, things were quiet. Karen kept to herself, though she often gave David cold stares when their paths crossed. Ryan, on the other hand, waved shyly whenever he saw David, as if grateful someone had listened to him. But peace never lasted long on that street. One night, just as David was about to head to bed, he heard strange noises outside. He opened the window and saw two figures in his yard. His heart raced. He grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. The beam of light caught Ryan and another teenage boy standing near the fence. They looked guilty, holding cans of spray paint. The boards were already covered in messy red marks. "Ryan!" David shouted. Ryan froze. The other boy dropped his paint can and ran off into the darkness. Ryan stayed rooted to the spot, his face pale. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't want to. He made me do it. My friend said it would be funny." David lowered the flashlight, his anger softening when he saw the boy's fear. "Ryan, this isn't funny. This is vandalism. It has to stop." Before Ryan could answer, Karen's voice rang out from her porch. "What's going on out there?" She hurried across the yard. When she saw the paint on the fence, she gasped loudly. "Oh my! Look at what your fence has done now. It attracts trouble. Even kids can't resist messing with it." David stared at her in disbelief. "Your son did this, Karen. I caught him with the paint can in his hand. Karen shook her head quickly. That's ridiculous. Ryan would never do such a thing. You're just trying to blame him to cover your fence's problems. But Ryan spoke softly. Mom, it was me. I did it, Karen turned sharply. Be quiet, Ryan. You don't know what you're saying. Tears filled the boy's eyes. I'm tired of lying. I hit the fence. I painted it. I dumped trash on it. You told me to, but I don't want to anymore. I'm sorry, Mr. David. The words hung heavy in the air. David felt a lump in his throat. He had wanted the truth to come out, but seeing Ryan break under the pressure was painful. Karen stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Neighbors had gathered at their windows again, drawn by the commotion. They had heard Ryan's confession clearly. Finally, Karen snapped. Fine, so what if he did? He's a child. Children make mistakes. You can't hold that against him. David shook his head slowly. This is not about mistakes, Karen. This is about honesty and respect. I've been patient, but this has gone far enough. Karen's eyes blazed with fury. You think you've won, don't you? You think you're smarter than me? But I'll never let this go. She grabbed Ryan by the arm and pulled him back toward their house. The boy glanced over his shoulder with a look of apology before disappearing inside. David stood alone in his yard, staring at the paint streaks on his fence. His heart felt heavy. He knew he could fix the boards again, but repairing the damage between neighbors was far harder. The next day, David went to the police station with photos of the vandalism and a statement about what had happened. He explained Ryan's confession and Karen's behavior. The officer listened carefully and promised to file a report. Back home, David started cleaning the paint from the fence. As he worked, more neighbors came by offering help and kind words. Together, they scrubbed and painted until the fence looked decent again. For the first time, David realized he was not alone. The neighborhood was tired of Karen's endless battles. People were beginning to see the truth clearly. Still, David knew Karen would not stop until something forced her to. She had already used the HOA, the city, and even her own son in her fight. What would she try next? That question was answered a week later, when a formal notice appeared on David's door. This time, it was not about the fence. It was about his entire property. Karen had filed a demand for a full review of his house, claiming it was lowering the value of the neighborhood. It was the boldest move yet, and the most dangerous one. David's yard was quieter now than it had been in weeks. The broken fence was repaired, the grass had grown back around the posts, and the place looked whole again. Yet the memory of what had happened still lingered in the air. Neighbors often slowed their walks when they passed by, their eyes landing on the fresh wooden panels that stood straighter than the old ones. To them, those panels were not just pieces of wood. They were proof that sometimes fairness actually won. After the court case, Karen had become noticeably quieter. She no longer shouted from her porch about the color of mailboxes or the length of grass. She walked faster to her car, avoided long conversations, and even skipped one HOA meeting. It was strange, but David felt no joy in her silence. He simply enjoyed the peace. Ryan, however, was a different story. The teenager had been forced to face responsibility for the first time. The court had ordered community service hours, and part of those hours included helping the HOA with maintenance tasks around the neighborhood. David often saw him sweeping sidewalks, trimming bushes, or painting small fences. At first, Ryan did the work with a sour expression, but as weeks passed, his face softened. He started greeting people instead of ignoring them. One morning, David was pulling weeds near his repaired fence when Ryan walked over with a paintbrush in his hand. He paused, shifting his weight awkwardly. "Hey, Mr. David," Ryan said. His voice carried hesitation, but it was more respectful than before. David looked up. "Good morning, Ryan. How's the painting going?" "Almost done," Ryan replied, glancing at the fence. "I wanted to say sorry for crashing here and for what I said to the police. Mom made me, but I went along with it. I shouldn't have." The apology caught David by surprise. For a moment, he saw not the reckless boy who had broken his fence, but a young man struggling to grow up in the shadow of a demanding parent. "I appreciate that," David said kindly. "It takes courage to admit a mistake. What matters is that you learn from it." Ryan nodded, his shoulders relaxing as if a weight had lifted. From that day on, he greeted David regularly, sometimes even offering to help with small chores. The fence that had once been the cause of conflict now stood as a silent reminder of change. The HOA community also shifted. With Karen no longer dominating every meeting, other voices rose. Neighbors began to speak more freely about issues that mattered, like playground repairs and security cameras. Without constant arguments, meetings became smoother, shorter, and surprisingly pleasant. Mrs. Green, the chairwoman, pulled David aside after one such meeting. "You know, your patience through all this has set an example," she told him. "If you had lost your temper or tried to fight fire with fire, things could have gone very differently. But you stayed calm, and now the whole neighborhood is better for it." David smiled modestly. He never set out to change the HOA or to teach anyone a lesson. All he had wanted was fairness. Yet in standing his ground respectfully, he had helped shift the balance of the community. As weeks turned into months, the story of Karen's son crashing into the fence slowly became less of a hot topic and more of a neighborhood tale told with a shake of the head and a chuckle. Some laughed about how Karen had tried to blame David. Others repeated the part where the police towed Ryan's car instead of punishing David. The story spread like a reminder that truth, though sometimes slow, always comes to light. One Saturday afternoon, David was grilling in his backyard when Karen appeared at the edge of her lawn. She stood stiffly holding a small dish. For a moment, David thought she might start complaining again, but instead she walked over. "I made some pie," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. "I had extra. Thought you might want some." David was so surprised he almost laughed. "Thank you, Karen. That's thoughtful of you." She placed the dish on the patio table and hurried away without another word. It wasn't exactly a heartfelt apology, but it was something. David accepted it for what it was, a small gesture of peace. Later, as he ate a slice of the pie, he thought about how much had changed. Karen, for all her stubbornness, had been forced to see that her usual tactics no longer worked. Her son was learning responsibility, and the community was more united than ever. That night, David sat on his porch with a cup of tea. The street was quiet, lit by soft yellow lamps. His fence stood straight, stronger than before. Across the road, a few neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt like the peaceful place it was meant to be. David reflected on everything. The crash had been sudden and stressful, the arguments exhausting, the court case tiring. Yet in the end, justice had been served. The truth had stood firm, just like his fence. What had begun as a moment of chaos had ended with growth, for Ryan, for Karen, for the HOA, and even for David himself. He had learned that patience and persistence could overcome even the loudest voices. As he leaned back in his chair, a gentle breeze rustled through the repaired fence. It no longer looked like just wood and nails. To David, it symbolized resilience. It was proof that no matter how hard others tried to bend the truth itself would stand tall. The fence had been broken once, but it had come back stronger. And in a way, so had the neighborhood.